through what we're going to do. Please, and I acknowledge that the recording is starting now, so be aware of that in your participation in the meeting. Okay, so when I gave my talk at CyberCon 2025 and when Martina and I first met, I wasn't the privacy officer at Air Services Australia. I was a lawyer in private practice specialising in privacy and AI compliance. So I've changed jobs since then, but my new employer was quite happy for me to come and do this presentation. So I acknowledge their generosity in allowing me to take out some work time to do that. I also acknowledge that the slide templates that you're looking at are from CyberCon 2025. The content has been updated, but the look and feel is still CyberCon 2025. Thank you to the CyberCon organisers for making such a pretty template, and hope they won't mind me reusing it. So today, what are we going to talk about? I'm going to just give us a bit of an idea of where we are up to with AI in Australia and the key developments in the past 12 months in terms of AI regulation and AI consequences, I suppose, and talk a little bit about where to from here. This is because I'm a lawyer, what I'm focusing on is really the rules around AI, and in the early part of Australia's AI maturity journey, a lot of the focus was on the rules around building AI and putting it in place in projects, and only now are we starting to see some focus on what happens legally when AI stuffs up. And so still most of this presentation is on the former kind of rules, but we will mention a couple of the later kind of legal consequences as well. So AI regulation in Australia. We don't have in Australia a dedicated AI Act. We looked like we were going to get one for a while, but then late last year, the Productivity Commission came out and said that standalone laws to govern artificial intelligence should only be considered as a last resort. So I have a link to that news report there if you want to go and have a check out of that. I'm hoping to be able to provide a PDF copy of these slides for you to survey afterwards. So all of the links, you'll be able to follow along there. Just by way of contrast, the European Union does have a dedicated AI Act, and that's seen as the template for comprehensive regulation of AI. So if you ever want to find out what sorts of things are regulated when the governing bodies do get together and decide to give it a red hot go and look at the EU AI regulatory framework. So in Australia, we don't have our dedicated AI Act. The government has instead decided to kind of just go with a piecemeal regulation of AI. That means we have a big split between AI that handles personal information as training material or prompt inputs and other AI. Yes, that's one of the ways that you have to be more careful in terms of the rules when you're dealing with AI that's handling personal information. And another big split we have is between Commonwealth and some state governments and what they can do and what the private sector has to comply with. And even in the Commonwealth space, there is a massive carve out for defence and for what's called the National Intelligence Community. So they don't have to comply with the stricter government rules. They kind of operate as a law unto themselves for policy reasons to do with protecting us from the baddies. They have to be able to act as agilely as the baddies can act, I believe, is the way that it is defended. AI issues emerge in lots of different fields across the regulatory landscape. They're particularly prominent in copyright law, workplace relations law, consumer protection law, and criminal conduct. And the decision has been taken that all of those fields are just going to operate as usual, and when AI issues come up, they will just be dealt with under those laws. And also, if you are in the security space and you are putting together an AI system, which I understand, is mostly the connection that folks on the call will have here, there are rules for putting together AI systems that use official information the Protective Security Policy Framework at the Commonwealth Government level has a policy advisory on that, and you can follow the link there. It basically circumscribes the platforms and technologies that can be used to handle official information with AI. And it actually has a list of what you can and can't, or has a list of what you should use, not a list of what you can't use. So AI regulation in Australia, I said it was piecemeal, and I said it was harder when you got personal information involved. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means now. For AI that handles personal information, the key regulatory instrument is the Commonwealth Privacy Act, and that covers Commonwealth government agencies, health service providers broadly, and all businesses with a turnover over $3 million. So it doesn't cover small businesses. It also covers businesses that sell and buy personal information. So even if you're small, you don't get out of the Privacy Act. So there are a bunch of principles in the Commonwealth Privacy Act that talk about how you handle personal information. That's information about a real individual person that identifies that person, or where they're reasonably identifiable from that information. So you could say my name and my phone number, they are my personal information, but also if someone tells you something about the woman who lives at my address, I'm the only woman who lives at my address. So that's personal information because I'm reasonably identifiable from that information. So that's the kind of information that when you're using it with AI gets regulated by the Privacy Act. The relevant privacy principles, I'm just going to give a quick whistle-stop tour of those. Principle 1 is about transparency. And in December 2026, there is an amendment coming to they're going to add some extra bits on the end of that principle that will require entities covered by the Privacy Act, so all of these Commonwealth government agencies and health service providers and all businesses with their over $3 million turnover, entities covered by the Privacy Act are going to have to update their public privacy policies, and they're going to need a new paragraph for automated decision making. So that where they use that with personal information. So that will cover where you use AI to make decisions about individual people. It also is slightly broader. This is an amendment that comes off the back of the Robo-Debt scandal, and Robo-Debt wasn't technically AI, it was just an algorithm of a more mechanical kind that wasn't working off the right information to start with. So those sorts of things are also where they drive decisions about individual people that can significantly affect their lives. Those are the kinds of decisions that you're now going to have to list in your privacy policy if you have one. The other part of Principle 1 that affects AI projects is the requirement, if you're a Commonwealth Government agency, to do a privacy impact assessment. That requirement looks like now kind of by default being extended out to other concerns, other private sector organisations. For example, Bunnings was recently found to be in breach of APP1 because they didn't do a privacy impact assessment before introducing facial recognition in their stores. So it behooves all organisations, whether they are government organisations or not, to think about doing privacy impact assessments for high privacy risk projects, including ones that use AI, as the Bunnings did, because the facial recognition tool was artificial intelligence driven. Okay, so that's Principle 1. Principle 3 is about collection of personal information. And it requires things like you can only collect personal information where it's related to your functions and activities as an organisation or as an agency, and that you must collect it by lawful and fair means. And both of those are likely to come into play where you are another example, I suppose, of facial recognition, where you are using facial recognition tools to collect people's faces, which are their personal information. You are you necessarily doing that by lawful and fair means if you don't tell them? Are you doing it for something that's related to your functions and activities? You have to make the case for that and document that somewhere to be properly compliant with APP 3. APP 5 is about notification of collection, and that specifies that you do have to notify people when you collect their personal information and sets out the kinds of things that have to be in that notification. That was another principle that Bunnings were found not to have complied with in the Bunnings determination, and that was affirmed when the Administrative Review Tribunal looked at the case as well. So if you are collecting people's personal information by way of artificial intelligence tools, it means that you have to notify them at that point of collection about certain things. There's also a principle that covers use and disclosure of personal information for a secondary purpose. So if you collect it for one purpose and you want to use or disclose it for another purpose, there are only certain situations where you're allowed to do that. And the rules about that are harder, or harder to comply with if it's sensitive information about a person. One of the things that's defined as sensitive information is biometric information that's collected for identification purposes. So you need to be, if you're using and disclosing things like that for a purpose other than the one you collected them for, you need to make sure that you're complying with Australian Privacy Principle 6. One of the last ones that we'll talk about is Principle 10, which is data quality. This can come up interestingly in things like use of large language models. And if you input personal information into a large language model as part of a prompt, and then it gets spat out several years later in response to somebody else's inquiry, it could be old information, inaccurate information by that point. And that means that the use of the model and the construction of the model and the training of the model won't be complying with the organisation's responsibilities to maintain up-to-date and accurate information about the people that it holds information about. So data quality principle is another one that comes up in an AI context a bit. We also have two principles about personal information going where it shouldn't. One is, overseas disclosure. You have to be upfront with individuals where their personal information is likely to be disclosed overseas to a place which doesn't have the same level of privacy protections as Australia. And data security is a more general obligation to keep people's personal information safe from unauthorised access, disclosure, loss, modification, interference, etc. So both of those together kind of lean very heavily into the cybersecurity and data sovereignty aspects of AI use. Again, if you're thinking about a large language model scenario, there are certain scenarios where you could be typing a prompt into a Gen AI using a large language model, and in order to interact with the model, the prompt that you type in has to go overseas, be decrypted, interact with the LLM, and then come back with the answer. And in that data flow, you will have possibly breached APP 8 and APP 11 if you haven't done your due diligence and if you haven't told your users what's likely to be happening to their information. So those are quite relevant principles as well. And again, it's only personal information. I could type a prompt about give me a good banana cake recipe and that wouldn't be relevant here. But if I typed a prompt with personal information in it, I'm advising a client and I type all of their personal details in there and ask the LLM to recommend next steps, I may well have breached APP 8 and APP 11 by doing that. What is important is considering what the data sovereignty issues are and what the overseas disclosure picture is with the particular model you're using. And it is different whether you're using a publicly available tool or one that's part of a corporate tenancy. So lots of issues to consider there. And finally, there are some guidelines for projects using AI with personal information that the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner has produced, precisely because the AI, many AI projects cross over with these privacy principles, so they can be accessed at OAC's website. They are a couple of years old now. They probably do need an update, but I think OAC will be getting to that soon. Okay, so that's what it looks like for personal information. As we talked about, the picture for AI generally is a little bit more complicated, and it has changed a lot in the last 12 months. So now I'm going to talk us through some of those developments. First, in government, there has been an update to the responsible use of AI policy, and that covers all large Australian government agencies at the Commonwealth level. It doesn't cover things like corporate Commonwealth entities. So the entity that I work for now is not actually covered by the responsible use of AI policy. But for the entities that are covered by it, you know, Centrelink and Services Australia and the Department of Education and all of the big Commonwealth agencies, there are actually quite a lot of extra requirements that they have to comply with in implementing AI within their agencies. There is also a national AI plan, which the government released in December. We'll talk a little bit more about that. There are some AI contract clauses that have been released by the Digital Transformation Agency, and there is also a full commercial off-the-shelf contract template if you're acquiring an AI system. That's a COTS system. So they are useful if you are a buyer as a Commonwealth body, and also if you are a seller, you will possibly be asked to incorporate these clauses into your agreement where you're selling something into government. So it's worthwhile being aware of it from both sides. There is an AI technical standard that has been released by the Digital Transformation Agency as well. So that delves much more into the cybersecurity and data sovereignty aspects that we were talking about before. So that's the key developments in government in the last 12 months. And in general, the regulator has specified in its regulatory priorities that it's going to go after situations where rights preservation in new and emerging technology is an issue. We've mentioned cases against Bunnings, and also there is a similar one against Kmart that have both been decided in the last 12 months, and we'll talk a little bit more about them as well. On the training of AI models, we have an issue about copyright and AI training material. The Productivity Commission was angling for an exception called a text and data mining exception to the Copyright Act that would have allowed AI model developers to conduct text and data mining on creative works that are publicly available in order to train their models. And normally when you do that, you have to pay the creator, but there was a discussion about whether or not there should be an exemption. The government thought about that and said, no, we are not doing a text and data mining exemption. You still have to pay creators. So that's still a pretty contested space because we know that that payment doesn't necessarily happen. We have Meta continuing to try to use social media posts to train its AI models. We have CSIRO who've come out with some very interesting anti-training tech, which is kind of a little hash you can put on an image that confuses any AI that's trying to, or any AI model training process that's trying to run over it. We have more progress with the implementation of the EU AI Act, which we'll talk about if we've got time. And we've got development starting to happen in AI accountability. So there are well-known biases that can creep into AI based on the data that they're trained on. And these biases are now starting to result in possible legal consequences. There's a case in the US, which is still in progress, where an individual, well, he's actually started as an individual, but it's become a class action now, is suing a recruitment company, well, sorry, an AI provider of technology to recruitment companies because in his view, because he is an African American who's over 40, he has been automatically screened out of, several dozen roles that he's applied for. And that case has been allowed to go ahead, like it's beyond the preliminary stages now, and the court has said, yes, there's a case to answer here. So everyone is grabbing their popcorn and wondering how that is going to land. And in particular, who's going to pay if there's damage found and damages awarded? Is it the owners of the algorithm who pay, or is it the company that deployed the algorithm to decide recruitment in its own case? Or is it some combination of both? And kind of related to this, we are now seeing insurance companies trying to exclude AI, adverse AI incidents, I suppose you would call it, from insurance policies that they offer to businesses. We saw something similar with cyber insurance or cyber incident insurance. So this is really just an extension of that kind of activity, but there's a real discussion going on in the insurance space at the moment about who has to cover the risk and where does the risk sit and where does the liability sit. And nobody knows yet, so it's all up in the air and one to keep an eye on. Okay, so we now have a little bit of a more detailed look at some of the developments that I just talked about. So the first one is that the responsible use of AI policy at the Commonwealth government level has had an update. It used to just have two things in it that agencies had to do. They had to issue a public AI transparency statement and they had to nominate an accountable official for AI. And that used to be the only compulsory activities that agencies had to undertake under that policy. It's had an update as of December 2025, and now the mandatory requirements are legion, and they are both at agency level and also at the level of individual AI use cases. And we'll talk about those on the next slide. There's a kind of time frame for these teeth to move into biting position, as it were. So by June, which, by a month, less than a month from now, agencies have to develop a strategic position on AI adoption and communicate this clearly to their staff. By December, they have to establish an approach to embed responsible AI practices, implement mandatory training for all staff on responsible AI use, begin conducting AI use case impact assessments, establish an internal register of in-scope AI use cases, and designated an accountable use case owner for each in-scope AI use case. And then, so a lot of work to be done by the end of the year. And then by April 2027, there's a kind of tail end exercise where agencies have to go back over pre-existing AI use cases and work out if they're in scope, and then bring them into regulatory compliance with the compulsory parts of the policy. So this is quite a disproportionate workload, I suppose, on government agencies. This is quite on the pointy end of regulatory rigor, and it would be great if everyone in the economy had to do this, but it's only the Commonwealth agencies that have to do this at the moment. Although there are some analogues that are lower level in some state government contexts as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what the new mandatory requirement looks like. At the agency level, you still have to have your accountable official and you still have to have a transparency statement. And now agencies and they have to develop that strategic approach to AI adoption, and that has to be done by next month. And then they are responsible for operationalizing responsible use of AI and staff training on AI. And you saw on the previous slide that they also have timeframes attached. The staff training is one of the ones that kicks in by the end of the year. And then at the AI use case level, there's a lot of accountability and risk management boxes that have to be ticked. The policy has a kind of an appendix at the end that talks about when AI use cases are in scope or out of scope. Basically, when they're likely to be higher risk. And there's a carve out for early stage experimentation. So you can do little sandbox and test AI projects without having to get involved in all of these compliance pieces. But you have to set up accountability for each AI use case if it is in scope and it's not a test. You have to make sure it's updated onto the internal AI use case register. You have to do an AI use case impact assessment for it, and there's a tool that is being provided to do that, and that's quite a long kind of questionnaire with a lot of issues to consider, and some of them are privacy and some of them are ethics, and some of them are kind of broader issues to do with the impact that the AI will have, or the use of the AI will have. And then you have to set up proper governance for the use case, and there are rules about deployment and reporting and monitoring as well. And there's a lot of the detail lives in an extra document called the Standard for Accountability. So a whole lot of regulatory content for people in Commonwealth government agencies to get across as far as using AI in projects goes. Okay, so another one of the developments that we talked about was the National AI Plan, and that was released in December 2025, and there's a link to it here. The AI Plan, just to summarise it, set out 3 themes and 9 actions, and that kind of organised itself that way. One theme is capture the opportunities, one theme is spread the benefits, and one theme is keep Australians safe. And so not all of these are to do with AI regulation. Some of them are to do with, investment and things like building smart infrastructure and backing Australian AI capability and attracting investment are all in that space. Spread the benefits talks a little bit more across the regulatory space in scaling AI adoption, supporting and training Australians and improving public services, and then keeping Australians safe. It's a key part of the National AI Plan to mitigate harms. So there's a bit of monitoring going to be going on there, promoting responsible practices. That includes things like the policy we just talked about, and partner on global norms with other AI regulatory and research bodies across the OECD and other places. So that's kind of broadly what the National AI Plan looks like. Just quietly, a lot of the things in the National AI Plan were happening anyway. It seems like the government has hoovered up everything that had AI anywhere near it and put it in this document. But there were a few things in the document that were of interest, so I have summarised those on the next slide. So you'll hear of 2 new AI-related bodies that are going to start being active in this space at the Commonwealth Government level. One of them is the AI Safety Institute, and one of them is the National Artificial Intelligence Centre. So just the first one first, the AI Safety Institute is not a regulator. It's more a research and coordination body. And it's going to monitor, analyse and share information across government and internationally. That's one of the places where I assume that we are going to find out about the harms that we have to mitigate. And the National Artificial Intelligence Centre is much more focused on AI adoption. It's part of the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, and it offers tailored guidance on AI adoption for businesses, not-for-profits, small and medium enterprises, banking, financial services, insurance sectors, and First Nations enterprises and creators. So if you're interested in actually what AI adoption looks like in a particular context, that's the place to go. And the AI Safety Institute will have a more broad remit looking across gathering all of the information and monitoring what's going on. The government is considering a number of things but hasn't committed to any of them yet in the AI plan. One of the ones to watch is changes to workplace laws. the Fair Work Act and the Work Health and Safety Act being considered in the medium term around transparency, meaningful consultation, worker co-design, safety and privacy when introducing AI into workplaces. So part of me is not sure how much of that is just a posture to make the government's base understand that they haven't been forgotten. But I would be interested to see what changes end up actually making it through consultation and design processes and coming into LAW law. It could be that there are more things like guidelines that result from that consideration work in the workplace context. Whether changes to the legal framework for supporting government use of automated decision-making, which may include AI, that's being considered, whether those changes might be needed in order to, ensure human decision makers remain accountable for key decisions. So that's another one area where that kind of who is responsible issue is being kind of coming up against the real world, and there may be actual legal changes to make it clear who is accountable for particular decisions. The government's also considering minor updates to consumer protection law. They did an analysis and found that roughly what is in place now is adequate, but there might be minor changes that are needed, and they'll need to consult the states and territories on those. There are going to be possibly further restrictions on Notify style apps. It's already a criminal offence to make a deep fake of someone, but they may need to tweak those offences and put further rules around the use of those apps, or possibly get better at banning them altogether. And there are going to possibly be reforms to tackle algorithmic bias. So you remember we were talking about the recruitment context before. That's an example of something that might end up being subject to legal reform in the future, but not yet. And just for good measure, I'll note the Australian Public Service is also subject to a special AI plan for the APS, and there's a link to that there. So we've talked about the responsible use of AI policy, and we've talked about the National AI Plan, and they are both very heavily in the Commonwealth government space. This is another one from the Commonwealth government space. There are AI contract clauses and templates available. We did talk about these a little bit earlier. So there used to just be some clauses, and now there is actually a full contract template that was released in October 2025 for purchase of COTS AI systems delivered as cloud services. The AI model clauses that predated those can be used with digital marketplace 2 contracts if there's something that makes sense to you. And they're basically, contracts selling computer style, or sorry, it's contract selling digital and cyber products into the Commonwealth government. And those clauses cover, eventually they're going to cover 3 use cases. Use case 3 is still under construction. So we still don't have clauses where the government is purchasing a product with embedded AI, although the COTS contract will cover off some of that. But we do have clauses that cover where the government is purchasing services, where the seller might use AI to provide the services. And that, for example, would cover where a consultant is using AI to help prepare a report. You would want some pretty strong quality control clauses in your contract there to ensure that they went through the report, just to name an example at random, and tried to get rid of all hallucinations before providing it to government and asking for money. And the second use case is where government purchases AI, which can be trained on an agency's data. So there are some contract clauses that are available to review there. Again, interesting if you are selling into government, also interesting if you are in government trying to buy. Okay, and lower down at a technical level, we have an AI technical standard. If I click this link, are you watching my slide or are you watching my webpage? I bet you're not. Yeah, I bet you're still watching my slides.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. I'll leave that because it's a bit too tricky to pop in and out. And it's going to take longer than I've got. But just know that there's a link here to the DT8 AI technical standard, and it covers what is considered to be best practice at a technical level for implementing AI projects, and that will cover things like data sovereignty and security standards as well. Okay. The regulator, this is again just switching back to the whole of the economy, but the bit of the economy that is dealing with personal information. That's what's caught by this slide. The Office of the Australian Information Commissioner updated its regulatory priorities for 2025 and 2026, and they include rights preservation and new and emerging technologies, and in particular they're going to be focusing on facial recognition and forms of biometric scanning, new surveillance technologies such as location data tracking in apps and cars and other devices, looking at the government's use of artificial intelligence and automated decision making, and that's it. Sorry, I thought I had one more, but I don't. So those are the areas that are AI flavoured, and you can see that OAC's regulatory priorities are very AI flavoured up until, I suppose that's really only the end of next month, but I would expect their priorities for next year to look pretty similar in terms of where they're going to put their regulatory muscle, bearing in mind that under the Privacy Act, OAC now have a lot of extra powers as of December 2024, and a lot of extra penalties that they can ask a court to impose. So this is an indication of where those efforts are going to be focused most directedly. Okay. Again, the whole of economy, but this is again thinking about personal information and particular facial recognition and biometrics context. Last year there was a Privacy Commissioner determination, an OAC determination against Bunnings for implementing facial recognition in its stores. OAC basically found that Bunnings hadn't done enough of a privacy impact assessment or privacy risk assessment before putting the facial recognition technology in stores, and that it hadn't adequately told customers that their information was being collected and matched against a blacklist, and that was found as an adverse. So basically it would found that Bunnings had breached the Privacy Act. They didn't get any penalties imposed, but a breach was found, and it was written up publicly, which I suppose resulted in some brand damage for Bunnings. The Administrative Review Tribunal, appealed, assessed this on appeal. So Bunnings appealed, and ART assessed the case again, and they actually upheld almost all of what the Privacy Commissioner had found. So all of the breaches I just outlined for you were upheld by the ART, but the one thing that wasn't was APP 3.3, which was when is it justified to collect sensitive information without consent? Or when is it permitted under the privacy principles? Sensitive information includes a biometric template of somebody's face to be used for identification purposes. And there was no consent mechanism. There was no sign saying, please don't come into this store. By coming into this store, you are consenting to us collecting a biometric template of your face. And the Privacy Commissioner found that that was a breach of APP 3, but there is an exception which the Administrative Review Tribunal found was applicable here, and that was a permitted general situation where the entity has a reasonable belief that it needs to act to address misconduct. And there's a lot of extra words in there that we haven't really got time to go into now. But basically, the ART came down on the opposite side of that question to the Privacy Commissioner, and they found that Bunnings was able to collect sensitive information without people's consent in this context because of the way that they were trying to use their biometrics. So essentially, they had a blacklist of folks who had caused trouble in Bunnings stores in the past, and they were matching everyone's face against the faces of the people on that blacklist in order to identify where people who had, for example, been violent to staff or had walked out with thousands of dollars worth of equipment without paying, etc. Where those kinds of matches came up, they were able to deploy security pretty quickly to remove people from the store. So anyway, the ART found that scenario, the collection of sensitive information without consent, was justified for facial recognition. Interestingly, there was another facial recognition determination last year against Kmart. That hasn't yet been appealed anywhere, so we're just sitting on what the regulator, the Privacy Commissioner at the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner found, and they found that Kmart were not justified in collecting people's sensitive information without consent because in Kmart's context, they were trying to prevent retail fraud, which was different from trying to prevent your staff being beaten up. And there was a proportionality test that OAC tried to formulate about, basically how big is the harm you're trying to address, how big is your bottom line, and how big is the privacy risk you're introducing by scanning people's faces and collecting their biometric templates. And in that case, the Privacy Commissioner found that the proportionality wasn't there, and it was a breach of APP 3.3. But watch this space. I'm not sure that we've heard the last of this debate about use of facial recognition in retail, and certainly it's a live issue in other contexts as well. So let's keep on going. I'm aware we're going to run out of time soon. We're hoping to have time for questions at the end. So I'll just skip over this slide very briefly. Speaking about training of AI models, we've already talked about the fact that the government has said there will be no Copyright Act text and data mining exemption. And we've mentioned the CSIRO anti-training tech, and there's OAC guidance available on training models where you are using personal information to train them. So that's helpful. And there is also a recent survey by the regulator where they do a survey every couple of years on community attitudes to privacy, and their recent survey said 93% of people surveyed said don't train models on my information without my consent. So that's still a very hot button issue for the community. And yes, now we're at our final slide, where we talk about where to from here. So on the compliance side, for all AI projects that anyone happens to be involved in, you will need to continue to ask tough data sovereignty and cybersecurity questions. And at a technical level, they'll be covered off in the technical standard that we talked about, and also in the protective security policy framework rules about what AI you can use with official information. And get ready, if in a Commonwealth government project, get ready to start having to conduct AI use case impact assessments from December. And we will need to also keep an eye on workplace law amendments about consultation and employee co-design. I think they're the most likely to come next, but yeah, still a while away, and we don't know what form they will take. For AI projects that use personal information, keep doing things like privacy impact assessments, and that seems to be worthwhile doing even if you're not in government where it's compulsory. As you'll recall, Bunnings didn't do it and got pinged for not doing it. and get ready to address automated decision-making in privacy policies if you're an entity regulated by the Commonwealth Privacy Act from December. There is also a couple of days ago, there was an issues paper on that particular requirement that was released by the regulator. So if that's something that affects an organisation that you're in or advising or helping, then I would suggest go and read the issues paper and then read the consultation questions and see if there's anything in particular where the debate needs to be steered in a particular direction before the rules about enforcing that transparency requirement are finalised. So that's something to be aware of. In the governance space, continue to do things like have AI use policies in organisations and think about the particular context where AI is being used and what problems it's being used to solve. And putting in place things like AI project gateways and responsible executives and reporting lines. They're a good idea in any organisation, and they're compulsory in a Commonwealth organisation or a Commonwealth government agency as per the responsible use of AI policy that we looked at a few slides ago. Also kind of double down on using and understanding the DTA technical standard for AI projects and understand the contract clauses and the issues that they're trying to solve from both sides. And then on the best practice side, transparency is always better than not transparency, but it's difficult. It's a difficult line to walk. Staff upskilling and awareness needs to keep going on for everybody. And that is the best way, I think, by getting people on the problem and people aware of what's likely to go wrong. That is one of the better ways that exists for just increasing the rigor of governance and increasing the ability to act when things don't go right. And then there are also kind of standard risk management frameworks for AI, which are worthwhile getting across if this is something that's of professional interest to folks. And there's one that's produced by the US government, by NIST in particular. And there's also a really good risk management framework produced by the New South Wales government, which is worth having a look at also. So in our last, what have we got, 10 minutes, 7 minutes? I'm going to turn off my slides and now maybe we can have a bit of a Q&A session to round out our time together. Oh, thank you for your applause machine. I hope I didn't send you all to sleep in that, but feel free to jump in with questions or dump them in the chat. I'll just see what's in the chat already because I couldn't see the chat from the presentation. Oh, that was earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, that was for me.
Oh, that was
Thank you very much, Melinda, for summarizing everything we needed to know about the AI regulatory landscape. Does anyone have any questions that they would prefer to unmute themselves and ask Melinda directly? Or shall we wait for you to type your questions in the chat? I can ask a question until other participants start summarizing their questions. I remember that you mentioned that there is a requirement that businesses who are capturing, for example, face images of their customers, there should be a notification of collection. I'm just wondering if are there requirements about the quality of that notification? Does it need to be sufficiently visible to the clients to the customers? Because I remember that at my local Woolies, they were capturing facial images of their customers and we didn't know. But once we realized that it was even capturing the facial images of a 9-year-old, which is I don't think a violent person, they shouldn't be afraid of a 9-year-old who could be violent to their staff members. But when we asked their staff, they told us that there is a notification at the entrance, and the notification was so small and hardly visible to the customers. And when we asked them whether they store the facial image that they captured from, for example, a 9-year-old, the staff members didn't even know that they will store it or not. So are there any requirements for the businesses to transparently communicate with the customers before they enter the stores that your private data, your personal data will be captured, or if children's data is being captured or stored?
Yeah, that you have raised so many big issues there, Mashid. Unfortunately, again, we're relying on the Privacy Act. If we had proper AI regulatory framework, it might be able to be even more kind of rigorous. But in the Privacy Act space, it's all about reasonable steps. And so then it becomes an argument about, well, we had a notice, you know, and then the regulator has to have the resources to come in and say your notice wasn't big enough. Or some individual has to complain that the notice wasn't big enough, and then the regulator gets involved. And if the issue is big enough, it does end up in, you know, a determination, and possibly then gets argued up into a court context. But that could take years. If I were advising, you know, Woolies, I would say make the sign bigger and make it. And the other thing that Woolies has to do is, and this is more, it's actually easier to ping someone on not having something in their privacy policy, because that it doesn't have the language about has to take reasonable steps. It's just you have to say in your privacy policy X, Y, Z, and you would definitely have to say in your privacy policy that you were collecting people's biometric templates of their faces, and that you were keeping them, and when you kept them, and how long you kept them for, and who you were likely to disclose them to. All of that is meant to be in a privacy policy. And that yeah, is probably the easiest avenue to go after a Woolworths. And that issue of the 9-year-old, you know, the issue of scanning children is a really big one, and no one has, I don't think, looked at solving that or even making that an argument. Not as soon as I thought that would come up, because I suppose if you have, you know, essentially a robot doing the scanning, it doesn't know what it's looking at until it's had a look. So it at least has to temporarily get hold of a 9-year-old face before it goes, oops, that's too young, we throw them out immediately. So it's a difficult question, because you are still collecting someone's image, even if it's for 5 seconds to decide that you don't need the image. And that was in the Bunnings case, that was an issue, because Bunnings only handled or hung on to most of the faces that they collected for about 4 milliseconds, and then immediately discarded them when they didn't match the blacklist. But that was still ruled to be a collection of personal information that had to comply with all of the rules about notification. And you know, it's no different with a 9-year-old, where you're collecting to try and work out whether or not they fit the category of person you need to be looking at or not. So I don't know on a technical level how easy it is to solve that problem. You know, is it possible to set up facial recognition systems so that it doesn't, it is somehow able, before scanning a face, to work out maybe on a height or something that you haven't got someone who's likely to be relevant. And that, but that wasn't an issue that's come up yet legally, and I would be really interested to see what the regulator makes of that if it does come up. Particularly, as we were discussing earlier, you know, the Children's Online Privacy Code has just been released for comment, and the privacy of children in the kind of cyber space generally is becoming more and more of an issue. So I would expect there to be some legal developments there, and I'm surprised there haven't been already. But thank you for raising that. That was really interesting. Oh, thank you, Amy. We try. So There's so much going on. It's really very complicated to summarize so much of this material, and mostly it just overwhelms people, and it overwhelms me most days. So I'm glad that you found that at least some of it brought some clarity for you. Okay, anybody else? I think we've had a few people drop off as it's 12. Oh, good question, Arati. So CCTV systems installed in public places. There's a lot of intersecting rules, because at the state level there are rules about using closed circuit television and surveillance systems, but the Privacy Act also still applies. And in order to comply with both sets of rules, what you often see is those signs that basically have a picture of a camera on them and just says CCTV. And that is at the moment deemed to be adequate, is that you're on film. If you see this sign, it means you're being filmed. And there are rules about the kinds of places that CCTV can be installed. In, for example, childcare centres and healthcare settings and so forth, they're not allowed to be installed in places where people are getting changed. So there are kind of state level rules that apply to those, but yeah, they also have to comply with the Privacy Act, and the way they do that is by just saying you are being filmed. Just to be clear, closed circuit television is not a biometric collection system, but there are technologies out there that can be applied to film that's been taken from a closed circuit television, and you can run a technology over CCTV footage and create biometric templates from the faces that you see there. It's not happening in real time, so that there is a lot more possibility for a human to say, we only need, from this timestamp to this timestamp because there was a person there who we think was, tampering with the fence or something like that. So it's not that the issue goes away, but that there are more humans getting in between and hopefully making data minimization decisions about only analyzing certain bits of footage of certain people's faces who appear to be doing certain things wrong. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? Yes. Okay. And we haven't even talked about mythos or anything to do with, cybercrime and cyber pesting more generally, and the fact that AI models that and AI agents who are optimized for that are out there now. And that's a big worry if you are operating in a cybersecurity space, because you now have to shield against not only very motivated humans who want to wreak havoc, but also agents that have been motivated by the humans and that can be much more persistent than humans can ever be. That's not really a legal issue. It's just it's a landscape issue. It's an environment issue, and that's why I've stayed away from it in this talk. But I'm aware that that's the big black cloud on the horizon for a lot of folks who are thinking about these issues. And I don't know what the answer is. Be very afraid, I think, is possibly the only one. Matt Scarrett, under the impression that in public there's no expectation of privacy and that the relevant act had stipulations about only applying if there's a reasonable expectation of privacy. You're not wrong in that understanding, Matt. There's a special bit of the act which talks about there's a tort. It's a new thing where you can actually sue somebody for invading your privacy, and the tort only applies if there was a reasonable expectation of privacy in the setting where you were. So if you're at your home and a journalist used a telephoto lens to film you, and you were able to establish all of the other bits of the cause of action, you could possibly sue them for invasion of privacy that way, because you're at your house and you would reasonably expect that you would be private there. But even if you're walking around in public space, if an entity that is subject to the Privacy Act is collecting images of you, they still have to protect those images and look after those images. and notify about what's going on with those images in the same way as they would if you walked into a bank, or if you went on the Centrelink website and gave them your name and email address. So those rules still apply, but where it gets murky is maybe not even in a closed television context, but just in a context of people overhearing personal conversations. That's harder because it's not an entity that's subject to the Privacy Act that's collecting your information. It's just another human being who's overhearing something that you've said. But yeah, if there is a business that's earning more than $3 million a year that's collecting your information in a public place, they are certainly still required to comply with the Privacy Act in the way that they handle it and in the way they collect it and dispose of it. Thank you.
Awesome. I think everyone has asked their questions. Thank you very much for patiently answering our questions and for the very insightful talk. We very appreciate it, and we're looking forward to hearing more during the CyberCon, your CyberCon presentation this year.
Oh, I'm not sure my new employer is going to send me to CyberCon, so this might be the only chance that you have to have this talk. So I will do a PDF version of the slides that we've just talked through, and the links in there will be available to people to click through to go exploring on their own. Everything that I've talked about today is completely publicly available information, so there's no issue with me providing that summary to you. But I'll probably, before I PDF it, I will take the CyberCon branding off.
That would be
Just so that
really
it's clear.
helpful. Yeah. Then we can use the helpful links that you provided. But we wanted to see you again during CyberCon, and we hope that we will see you. But I'm glad that we had this opportunity to hear, and all of my colleagues were also able to hear about your work. Thank you again.
Oh, fantastic. It was really enjoyable to be able to contribute to your work and to your network building and to your knowledge. And again, very grateful to be part of the community for a moment. So thank you.
Have a very lovely day. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Take care.
Okay, take care. Thanks so much. And I will email the PDFs when they're done.
That would be great.
Thanks, Melinda. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.